So the end of 2023 saw the launch from Russia of a massive missile strike campaign across Ukraine. There were about 500 in a matter of less than a week, I believe it was, according to the BBC. And the Western mainstream media has also been reporting the aftermath, the attacks on Belgorod from Ukraine, the Russian city of Belgorod, as a retaliatory strike. There have been numerous of these strikes. The first one killed about 25 Russian people. Then the subsequent strikes were reported as foiled by the Russian side. I wanted to ask you both, what are the meanings of these strikes? Maybe we can begin on the Russian side. Alexander, how significant is this, and what does it tell us about the conflict and where it is right now?
Yeah, I think the first thing to say is that the Ukrainians may be representing their attacks on Belgorod as retaliatory strikes. But if one is simply talking about scale, and I'm not, that's all I'm talking about now. I'm not talking about the morals of this. The attack on Belgorod, it might be completely different. But simply in terms of scale, the Russian strikes are overwhelmingly greater and more powerful and far more devastating. And in fact, a few hours ago, when I was, researching the program that I did today, we've been getting more and more information coming out of Kiev, which was the major focus of the last big Russian missile strike. And it's pointing to an absolutely devastating picture. I mean, there are now satellite photos of factories, being reduced to smoking ruins, stories about production line workers, armaments workers being killed in large numbers, reports of air defense systems being destroyed, bunkers being destroyed. We can't verify and corroborate all of these claims, but the information that we do have points to an absolutely overwhelming strike carried out by many different kinds of missiles, launched from many different types of many different directions, over 4 waves of strikes, involving drones, missiles, a much more sophisticated attack in some respects than the attacks that we saw last year, which the Russians were engaging in last year, and doing huge damage. Now, huge damage to Ukraine's military-industrial complex, and a Ukrainian official has now come forward and has basically admitted that building weapons in Ukraine is impossible because the Russians are able to launch these strikes. But also massive damage to this air defense system that the West has worked so hard over the last year to try and build up in Ukraine, in the aftermath of the actually smaller Russian missile strikes that we saw last year. And the impression I'm getting is that this Western air defense system is being overwhelmed by the Russian strikes, which are larger, more sophisticated, more complex, and that the Western air defense system is proving more fragile than expected. And we're beginning to see signs of alarm and panic. There's a report earlier today that the European Union is going to try and find 1,000 Patriot missile interceptors, which might struggle to do. It's intended apparently to rebuild its own air defense system. Ukraine now accounts for a quarter of the Western air defense systems across the entirety of Europe. So that gives you an idea of how big this investment in this air defense system has been. And there's talk about setting up production lines for Patriot missiles in Europe, which is what the Europeans always say they're going to do. And I don't think anybody really takes that especially seriously. But the fact that they're talking in this kind of way shows how alarmed they are becoming by the sheer scale of this Russian missile strike. And of course, all the indications is that there are going to be more strikes like this coming over the next few weeks and months. And of course, the Russians have not yet used their most sophisticated and advanced cruise missile of all, which is their new Zircon missile, which we know entered series production last year. We don't know how many of them have been produced so far, but it's a hypersonic missile. But unlike the Kinjal, which is an air-launched ballistic missile, this is a cruise missile that can therefore attack from multiple directions. Its movements can't be tracked in a way that, say, the Kinjal missile can be. The Russians haven't used it, and one wonders what will happen if they ever do.
Any follow-up, Alex?
No, I think Alexander pretty much covered it. Putin said a while back, we haven't even started yet. I remember him saying that. We haven't even started yet. And I mean, it's just, the whole, I read the story buying 1,000 Patriot missiles, and they're just prolonging the agony of Ukraine. It really is. It's a terrible thing, actually.
And offering false hope. I mean, because that's what it amounts to.
Yeah, exactly. It's false hope. They're prolonging the agony because these politicians simply just can't admit that they've lost. Surrender, capitulate. Tell Zelensky to call up someone who can then call up Putin. They can save, possibly, I don't even know if that's possible anymore, possibly save whatever Ukraine or their state will be, depending on the Russians' terms, which are going to be very hard. But at least you save hundreds of thousands of lives, and I believe you save Ukraine in whatever form that's going to be. But they can't do it. The Europeans can't do it. The Americans can't do it. And just going off on what Alexander said, you can see. I don't know, Alexander, if you've read these reports, but I'm getting the sense that there are European leaders that are trying to distance themselves from Ukraine. You have Macron coming out and giving a statement. Well, we're not going to send weapons directly to Ukraine, and we're gonna invest in building a military-industrial complex there. Norway is saying the same thing. You can see that they're trying to figure out a way to show that they're still supporting the project, but they're keeping some distance. And Russia's coming along and saying, this is nonsense. You're going to build military factories. Come on, guys. I mean, we've been saying it for a while now, this building factories, and Ukraine's going to be what did they say? The Silicon Valley of military production in Europe. I mean, this is nonsense. This is nonsense. And then the Russians are proving it.
Well, I wanted to actually, I know you both are studious readers of Western mainstream media, and on this point of Ukraine catching up to the United States and the West in terms of weapons production, or maybe taking the responsibility of weapons production from the U.S. and West as they struggle to produce their own ammunition and artillery, etc. There was this article by Jack Watling. You may be familiar with him, Alexander. He is UK based, I believe. I think he was in the defense sector, and he has this to say in Foreign Affairs about a realistic plan for Ukraine. He says it would involve resourcing Kiev to maintain a defensive posture through most of 2024. While units are trained and equipped to mount offensive operations in 2025. Beyond the certainty this plan would offer Ukraine's generals, it would also signal to the Kremlin that it cannot count on winning a years-long war of attrition against an increasingly thinly resourced Ukraine. A U.S. commitment to supporting Ukraine through 2024 would also shift European allies' incentives toward investing more deeply in increasing the capacity of their weapons industries, reducing the burden on the U.S. through 2025. So this is exactly what you both are saying. I mean, that's first of all, this article claims that this isn't a stalemate, but the conclusion was that Russia and Ukraine lost. So of course they didn't see that Ukraine and primarily was the loser of 2023. But here, it's exactly what you both are saying, that this is what they're hoping for. They're hoping for almost outsourcing this conflict to Ukraine while it is being bombarded with just the lightest of what Russia can offer, or at least a very light version of what Russia can offer in terms of its capabilities.
Absolutely. I mean, I find this kind of article actually distressing. And Jack Watling is a member of the Royal United Services Institute. He's actually sometimes written some quite interesting and intelligent pieces about this war. He's somebody who should know better, because what he is proposing is fantasy. It is complete fantasy. Now, there is a case. It was expressed, it was articulated way back last August by Jim Webb and George Beebe. Also, by the way, I think it was in Time magazine actually, but they suggested that Ukraine go over to the defensive, abandon its counteroffensive, which was at that point already looking like it was going to fail, and open negotiations with the Russians. Now, what they're now saying is Ukraine go over to the defensive and keep fighting indefinitely, forever. Go on taking this constant hammering from the Russians day after day, week after week, see more of its industries destroyed, see more of its people killed, see more of its army degraded, because, of course, we can't accept the idea that the Russians are likely to win this war. And that's, when I say we, I don't mean the Ukrainians. I mean, exactly as Alex said, certain political figures in the West. Now, understand one thing about Jack Watling. He is, of course, British. And he is essentially here following the line of the British government. Now, there was an article that appeared just on Sunday in the Times, the London Times, which is, of course, the newspaper, practically to all intents and purposes, the newspaper of record here. And it said that the British government is now fanning out across Europe. It's sending its people all over Europe, saying to them, keep on funding Ukraine, go on producing weapons for Ukraine, keep this war going as long as you can, even if Donald Trump, horror of horrors, wins the election in the United States and cuts off American aid to Ukraine. We can't stop now. We can't let Putin win. If we focus all our energies on building up our military industrial complex in Europe, then we can somehow exhaust and outplay the Russians. That's exactly what Jack Watling is basically saying. So you can see various people in the British establishment are talking about these things. Now, it is completely unrealistic. It isn't going to happen. To see how unrealistic it is, go back to that title and look at the subtitle. He points about how Ukraine's counteroffensive failed. They always say this. They always say it failed. It didn't fail. It was defeated. The Russians defeated Ukraine's counteroffensive. The Russians won the battle. But they can't accept that. It all has to be expressed in terms of success or failure, not as you should do in war, defeat or victory. Now, the West has given huge resources to Ukraine. It's given its tanks, armored vehicles, self-propelled guns, millions of artillery shells, and they were defeated last summer. What realistic chance is there that if we start going around investing in factories which won't be producing anything for 5 years, that this is going to change?
Yeah, I mean it's incredible that these are grown-ups, these are adults that are coming up with these ideas and these plans. It just shows that they really don't care one bit about Ukraine. This is all ego. This is all ego. It's all about their power. It's all about their position. We can't be seen losing to the Russians. We can't be seen, we can't be seen losing to Putin. God forbid it looks like we've lost to Putin. Because Putin, he's he's the devil. He's everything that's wrong with the world. It's all been projected onto Putin, and so they can't be seen as losing to Putin. So, we're just going to run around and we don't have any more weapons because we've been demilitarized, right? The UK has nothing left. So they've been demilitarized by this war, and now they're going to run around and talk to other countries and try to convince other countries to demilitarize themselves so that they can accomplish what 500 billion and all the weapons of the UK and the US and France and Germany couldn't accomplish in the counteroffensive. So if you're a world leader and you buy into this sales pitch, I don't know what to say. Prepare to be demilitarized, I guess. But I mean, this is nonsense. This is not how you win a war. But they can't admit that they lost. And Alexander's right. And I even say it. I say the failed counteroffensive. That's how good their propaganda is. That's how good their propaganda is. I say failed counteroffensive. But it's true. They were defeated. And they've been getting defeated for the last 2 years. So, enough's enough. That's what they should be saying. Enough's enough. We've got a lot of elections in 2024, elections all over the place. Let's end this thing, and let's just admit that we lost, and let's just forget about this regime change, balkanization of Russia obsession that we've had over the last 50 years. And that would be the healthy, right thing for them to do, but they won't do it. We know that.
Yeah, and not only will they not do it, but they keep repeating. Back to this, I thought this article was a kind of a great indicator and illustration of this desperation and this delusional thinking. Here, even Watling admits that at one point, Ukraine was closer to where Russia was firing in terms of the amount of artillery rounds. But by the end of 2023, Ukraine was only firing 2,000 rounds per day, and Russia is now firing 10,000. That's a huge ratio. That's 5-1 Russian advantage. So they keep talking about arming Ukraine, get them to a point where there's parity. But first of all, that I don't think that would achieve victory, and it doesn't even seem like that's at all possible anytime in the future, given that Russia is not viewing this as a stalemate at all, right?
No, they're not. The Russians are not viewing this as any kind of stalemate. As Alex absolutely correctly said, Putin some time ago said we haven't even started yet. And in fact, what we're seeing, even as we speak now, is not a stalemate. It's a situation where the advantage is tilting steadily towards the Russians, but where they are still engaged in an attrition war. They still haven't really started yet. If you're tracking developments within Russia itself, what you're steadily seeing is a Russian military that is building up steadily, incrementally, and relatively fast. They've called up around 480,000 troops this year. 480,000 men have joined the Russian army, not this year, in 2023, joined the Russian army. All the indications are that military equipment production is increasing at rates that no one in the West so far has come remotely close to matching. I mean, we're talking about artillery. I mean, he talks about, that the Ukrainians are firing around 2,000 shells a day. That might even be an overestimate, by the way. The Russians are firing around 10,000 shells a day, a 5-1 ratio. But again, all the information that is coming out from Russia and elsewhere suggests that Russian artillery production is growing. And the latest information, and this isn't fully confirmed because obviously a lot of this is kept secret, but I'm getting this again from a multiplicity of sources, including some from within Russia itself, is that Russian artillery production, weapons production, increased fivefold between the start of the military operation and the fall of 2023. And now it has surged again. And it's now, the Russian Defense Ministry says, 17 and a half times greater than it was at the time when the war started. And I have asked, what does this mean in terms of, actual output of shells? And I'm told that currently it's between 4 and 5 million shells a year. 4 and 5 million. That's around 500,000 shells. Apparently, it's around something like 500,000 shells a month. Now, compare that with 2,000 shells, which Ukraine is firing a day. I mean, which comes to what, 60,000? I mean, you're starting to see how the numbers are starting to go. It's very soon going to be a 10-to-1 ratio. And even that's probably not the limit of this.
What was the EU goal that they set out? A million shells, isn't that what they set out to
shells.
do?
Yeah, and they only they've only provided a third of those, and they had to make up the difference by borrowing shells from South Korea, and they didn't make up the difference even there. But they borrowed 500,000 shells from South Korea, and they've been largely used up. It's likely that Ukraine's ability to keep firing shells is actually going to fall. It may be, if it's still 2,000 rounds a day, it's probably not going to remain at that level for much longer.
Yeah, and the EU created all types of incentives. They created a fund. They told member states that they'll actually buy the shells that they have in their inventory. They'll buy the shells from the member states. They told the member states that they'll invest in their production of shells. I mean, they incentivized this thing to the hilt. And the bottom line is that the member states in the EU, they couldn't do it because they just don't have the production. They can't do it. I can tell you, in Greece, you can't do these things. The days where we had factories and we could produce stuff like it's gone. It's over. It's not coming back. We lost that many, many years ago when we joined the EU. That all went to Germany. That was the deal, right? That was the deal. You enter the European Union, all the production, all the manufacturing gets centralized to Germany, and you guys, you do your tourism, you do your services industries, and we'll leave it there. So I mean, this is all fantasy. This production of a million shells that the EU wants to do, or a million drones, or whatever, 1,000 Patriot missiles. This is fiction. This is fantasy.
Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.